Britain's conversation, The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Now, I've got to tell you, George Osborne is not my favourite person by a long chalk. Indeed, during the referendum campaign, his threats of emergency budgets and interest rates going up and hundreds of thousands of people losing their jobs, I thought the whole thing was really pretty despicable. Since then, he's gone on to become editor of a newspaper that puts out a daily diet of negativity about Brexit. But I have to say, he gave a big interview last night on Newsnight, and he said one or two things that I think absolutely rang true. Here he was.
I think we were wrong to play into the debate that everything that Brussels did was a challenge and a battle and was wrong. We were too late in the day trying to explain some of the benefits of European Union membership. On immigration, we were promising targets that we couldn't deliver, and that then led to a debate about how you might deliver those targets. Not that I see any evidence that they're going to be delivered in the future, but we definitely contributed to that argument, didn't make enough of the value of immigration. Okay. So I'm happy to look at mistakes we made.
Let's just listen to the key part of that again. Cue George Osborne.
On immigration, we were promising targets that we couldn't deliver.
Promising targets we couldn't deliver. Oh, yes, and they certainly were. In fact, they were doing it over and over and over. Let's try David Cameron.
To get net migration into the tens of thousands each year,
Well, there's Cameron from three separate speeches. They're going to get immigration down to tens of thousands. Promised in the 2010 manifesto. Promised in the 2015 manifesto. Promised during the referendum campaign. And then, can you believe it? Despite the fact they say things that clearly, well, in my opinion, were totally unachievable. Mr. Osborne, for once, we agree. Despite all of that, despite the fact it cost them the referendum, at least that's what I believe, then the next Prime Minister, Theresa May, starts playing the same trick.
I also remain absolutely firm in my belief that we need to bring net migration down to sustainable levels. The government believes that is tens of thousands.
Oh dear.
The government believes that is tens of thousands.
I mean, it was never credible, was it? Never at any point was this credible. I criticised it in every single election. I knew that it was undeliverable because, of course, we couldn't control the numbers coming into the country from the European Union. So I think that what George Osborne has done here, in many ways, is he's told the truth. I think he's admitted that they told the public what they thought the public wanted to hear, and then it came back in the referendum and bit them in the backside. So let me ask you, what do you think? Was this, as I believe, willful dishonesty from the Conservatives repeatedly, or was it just false optimism? Let me know what you think, and if you think actually, they tried their best, they hoped they could do it, give them the benefit of the doubt, call 0345 6060 973, or maybe like me, you think the whole thing actually was disgraceful because they were willfully misleading the electorate knowing they couldn't deliver it. If that's how you feel, text to 84850 and tell me, do you think the target of tens of thousands should still remain? Let me know by tweeting, using the hashtag Farage and LBC, at LBC, and of course, you can watch us live on Facebook, and I know you're never shy of commenting there. Let's go to Chris in Croydon. So, Chris, Osborne actually has told the truth here, hasn't he?
Well, I don't know. I think it was a blatant lie from the start.
Oh, just okay.
Whatever they say, Nigel, the government policy is on immigration is the more the merrier. Don't forget, probably only about a third of it did actually come from the EU. 2/3 of it could have been stopped had they wished to do so.
Bit more than a third, Chris, but yeah, okay.
Yes, okay. But what is going on, and this is really under the radar, is we're being restocked. The idea is you're counteracting an ageing population by bringing in young blood.
Yes.
And, of course, they, in their turn, grow old too.
Yes.
What set the alarm bells ringing was an article in the Economist newspaper. It was a few years ago, and they advocated letting in 25 million people into the EU from outside.
Yeah, Mr. Barroso, when he was Commission President, was talking this kind of language. Chris, do you agree with me that it was these consistent broken promises. It was far from being tens of thousands. Actually, in that period, the numbers went up to net 330,000 a year and were above 250,000 pretty much every single year. Do you think, because clearly Osborne does, do you think it's that, above all, that cost them the referendum?
Oh, yes. And the main thing is, you see, the point is the benefits of immigration, the profits have been privatised and the costs have fallen on the general public.
Yeah, I mean, the benefits have been to... The benefits, Chris, have been to big companies, really, haven't they?
Exactly, to employers who didn't want to bother about training their own workforce.
I know.
The rest of us are paying for... There's a huge infrastructure bill now. You'll be told any day now we're going to import more Polish teachers to teach more Polish kids in our schools. It's absolutely ridiculous. And also, we're never going to get on top of the housing crisis. Now, the immigrants didn't cause the housing crisis, but as a result, there are people with well-paid jobs resorting to food banks because they got nothing left after they'd paid the rent.
Chris, I haven't got a problem with immigration. I think some great people have come to our country from Lithuania and Poland and Hungary and elsewhere. I think the problem is just simply numbers, isn't it?
Yeah.
Simply numbers. Chris, thank you. Well, Chris thinks it was an outright damn lie from the start, taking a harder line than I have on this. Lies, lies and more lies I get by text. I wonder what Rita, a new caller from Slough, makes of George Osborne's comments. Good evening, Rita.
Good evening, Nigel, and thank you for listening to me.
No, go on.
How are you?
Well, I'm all right. I'm actually, I have to say, be honest with you, I think George Osborne is at last telling the truth, isn't he? I mean, let's just listen again to what he said.
On immigration, we were promising targets that we couldn't deliver.
We were promising targets that we couldn't deliver. That's about as close as you'll ever get, Rita, I think, to a senior political figure admitting they were deceiving the public.
Yes, that's right. Yes, I do agree. And I voted leave in the referendum precisely because of immigration. I've got nothing against immigration, but I want... like a good immigration that's going to benefit the country, like if you're short of nurses or, where there's a skills shortage, fine. But, but not anybody, not every Tom, Dick and Harry, And another thing I'd like to say is the government often says, like, oh, we've got an ageing population, and then, and we haven't got enough youngsters, that's why we need immigrants. But then they contradict themselves, and on the other hand, you've got, you've got so many people homeless, so many people can't afford to buy their own houses. Why don't you give those people houses first, and then, then they'll be working?
Rita, isn't the truth of it? They told us this at 3 consecutive general elections because they thought it's what we wanted to hear.
Yeah. Well, they're fools for saying that. I mean, I just...
Well, they're still in power. They're still in Downing Street, but they did lose a referendum. Yeah, Rita, thank you. I'm going to move on. Political incompetence on an epic scale with the Tories to state a desired immigration figure in the tens of thousands. It was not only unachievable, but totally unrealistic, says Max from Grays. Well, Max, you may be right on one or both of those counts, but they just kept on doing it. Didn't they, Adam, in Westminster? They just kept on saying tens of thousands.
Oh, good evening, Nigel. How are you, sir?
Good evening. I'm well. I'm actually quite cheered that George Osborne is beginning to wake up to the truth.
Well, funnily enough, he struck me as someone who was permanent coma, as well as his sidekick Cameron. You know what? I listened to this diatribe and drivel last night, and do you know what it reminded me of, Nigel?
Go on.
Him and Cameron, the pair of them, I never thought of them before like this, but they strike me as Laurel and Hardy. They're a pair of clowns, a pair of comedians. They'd be best doing stand-up comedy in the comedy club in the West End.
Well, Adam, if they were a pair of clowns, they did get to be Prime Minister and Chancellor of the Exchequer for 6 years. It must have been quite some act, really, mustn't it?
Well, I mean, in fairness to them, they did manage to do bits and bobs for the economy, but this nonsense about immigration that they kept on droning on about, and now we've got this new nemesis, which I call Theresa May. She's a dead duck anyway. This nonsense has got to stop. There was never any chance of getting it down to the tens of thousands. And all of these figures knew that, because being in the EU and tied to all the institutions, forget about other countries, which I'm more than happy for people to come from India and Pakistan if they're qualified doctors or whatever else. They still don't get it, Nigel. They just don't get the fact They could never deliver what they promised. They're just a bunch of clowns. And
Well,
thank God there's people like you that stand up for us.
I think you're being too nice to them, calling them clowns. Adam, I thank you. Mark makes a very important point. He says the caller was correct. Net migration from the EU was never more than a third of total net migration. I think it was, but hey, I'm not going to argue about it. No effort was ever made to reduce migration from the rest of the world. Right, Mark, that point's crucial, because who was the person in charge of reducing net migration from the rest of the world? And she did it for 6 years. Do you know what her name was? Theresa May. And she failed completely and totally and utterly. Andrew on Facebook says, Osborne is wrong. The government was right to set migration targets. Andrew, was it right to set migration targets that it knew it actually wasn't going to achieve? Isn't that surely, Andrew, just deceiving the people? Please ring 0345 6060 973. Dave is calling from Croydon. Hi, Dave.
Yeah, hi, Nigel. Look, there's, from a lot of people's perspective out here, there's nothing wrong with immigration in the slightest, and I say even beyond limits. But the key to the whole thing is there's good immigration and there's bad immigration, and this country is sick of bad immigration that causes a drain on the country. Anything that is good for this country is good, whether it's 10,000, 20,000, 30,000. Anything that the people that can bring anything to this country genuinely, who have got something in common with this country, who believe in our system, who genuinely want to come here because they see this country as not an easy ticket, but they want to give something to this country. It doesn't matter. It's great. But anything that comes in from a third country through Europe that's not going to be good for this country cannot be good.
So why, Dave? Why did they set a target that Osborne now tells us they knew they could never achieve? Why?
Because it gets votes. It gets votes.
Well,
you know that.
Yeah,
I
well,
know that.
Dave, I think that's absolutely right. Thank you for your call. George Osborne, I think he has completely let the cat out of the bag. He's admitted that in election after election they told us things that they knew they were not going to be able to deliver. I think that's a disgrace, but I do believe it came back in the referendum to bite them in the backside pretty damned hard. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC at 6:15. I've never liked George Osborne's politics, his attitude, or anything. But I have to say, I think that interview he did last night on Newsnight, he did at least say something that was honest about what the Conservatives have done in successive general elections.
On immigration, we were promising targets that we couldn't deliver.
We were promising targets that we couldn't deliver. And, of course, that was something that made me really angry during those years. Now, what he went on to say, I think, was even more interesting. It was the impact that this debate had on the referendum.
It essentially allowed in the referendum a minority of people who were interested in, rather esoteric issues of sort of constitutional sovereignty. We allowed that kind of, I think, minority concern, because we pool sovereignty in all sorts of organisations like NATO, to be linked to immigration control, and that was pretty lethal in that referendum debate.
So he basically thinks that sovereignty, esoteric, limited, nobody really gives a damn. Well, I've always given a damn about sovereignty. But I have to say that the one thing that allowed me as leader of UKIP to turn it from a political party into a major political party was the morning in 2004, when I sat in the European Parliament and we had to vote on 8 former communist countries joining the European Union with absolutely no restrictions whatsoever. And the 3 of us who in those days sat there for UKIP voted against. And, of course, it was all passed by a massive majority. And as we walked out of the chamber, I said to my colleagues, that's the best day's work we will ever do in this Parliament, because I knew that if the issue of sovereignty could be seen, and in relation to the European Union, could be seen directly linked to immigration and open borders, that this is what would change the whole national debate. And when George Osborne says in the referendum that issue was lethal, he is absolutely right. And that was precisely, Mr. Osborne, what I set out to do and planned from 2004, because it seemed to me, as soon as in their minds the public linked those two issues, it would change politics in this country. So look, George and I, for once, are agreeing on his analysis, but I'm asking you, did they do this over all those years and at all these elections through willful dishonesty or false optimism? Were they right to set those targets? Jerry is a new caller from Newcastle. Good evening, Jerry.
Hello, Nigel. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. So were they right to set these targets, Jerry?
Yes and no. I think they were right to set a target. I think they were wrong, perhaps, initially to have set it as low as they did.
Mm-hmm.
I think the key element was signalling their position on where they wanted to be, rather than perhaps putting in something a bit more challenging. However, how many people you draw depends on a number of factors, one of which is that obviously if your economy is booming, and a lot of the European Union has a massive unemployment.
Yes.
Once we come down to what is effectively NERU, the low level of unemployment at which effectively everybody who can be employed is employed, you're going to end up being a draw.
Jerry, I completely understand that, and I completely understand that a couple of years later on, when Romania joined the European Union, the minimum wage in our country was 9 times higher than that in Romania. So you could come from Romania, you could live in a flat you share with 5 other people, and you could send money home. What you were earning here wasn't much in UK terms, but was huge and I completely understand why people did it, Jerry. But and to me, it was obvious what was going to happen. It was obvious that large numbers of people would come, take advantage of it, because they could probably make enough money in a year to buy a house in many parts of Central and Eastern Europe. But why did they, in 2010, 2015, during the referendum and in the general election 17, why did they keep telling us they'd reduce it to tens of thousands when clearly, as Osborne now admits, it was never going to be achievable?
I think they told us that because really it was signalling what the public pretty much wanted to hear.
Quite. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
The point I would go on to make is that a lot of people think that this is about xenophobia and racism and all the rest. The problem for me is if you get 288,000 coming in a year, we've had something near that figure for 10 years.
Yep.
And we keep getting told that this is a city roughly the size of Newcastle coming in every year.
Mm-hmm.
How many new cities have we built?
Well, and how many new roads do we have to build, and et cetera,
Well, this is the problem. So what you do is you cram them into the existing cities, which means the transport gets overloaded, the roads end up getting overloaded.
Yeah, I know, Jerry, absolutely.
The whole infrastructure gets overloaded.
But, Jerry, do you agree with me that actually what George Osborne has exposed is a willful dishonesty from the leadership of the Conservative Party on this issue?
I think it likely was. I think...
You're a very diplomatic man, Jerry. You really are. But I tell you what, it wasn't far away, was it?
Prime Minister, I might have gone for 200,000.
OK, well, then you might have achieved...
If I managed to achieve that, I might have gone a bit lower.
Yeah, OK. All right, Jerry, thank you. Nigel, you should be thanking George Osborne and the Conservatives. They did your job for you. They certainly left a very, very big open goal without anyone defending it. That is true. Why has Osborne said this now? To get back at May for sacking him? He was part of the lie by keeping quiet. I don't trust any of them, says Leslie. Well, Leslie... he absolutely was, but at least now he's talking about it, and I do have a bit of respect for that, I have to say. It would never be achievable in the European Union, but post-Brexit, there'd be no excuse anymore. Chris, post-Brexit, with a proper Brexit, no longer can the government on any issue say it wasn't us. We tried so hard, we were outvoted by Brussels. It's EU rules. Nothing we can do, Gov. Brexit takes that away completely. Brexit makes our MPs directly accountable to us. I rather like the thought and the prospect of that because, hey, voting might start to really matter again. It's called democracy, folks. It's why I'm in favour of Brexit. Nathan is a new caller from Santa Rosa in California. Hi, Nathan.
Hey, Nigel, long-time listener, first-time caller.
Welcome.
I think what George Osborne did was expose willful dishonesty, and I think there were ulterior motives related to the immigration picture baked into the whole economic bloc agreement that was signed back in the 60s or 70s, whenever it was, post-war period, and the cracks really started to show in earnest, I think, certainly with Tony Blair's leadership, when the mass immigration really started to pick up, and my friends in the UK started really talking on the internet quite a lot about that. the whole Anglosphere. Like the whole Anglosphere is like had kind of bad immigration.
Do you know, Nathan?
Coordinated across.
Do you know, Nathan? When I was first elected to the European Parliament in 1999, in all the literature that I put out, all the stuff that I said in the run-up to that election, I didn't mention the word immigration once, because it wasn't an issue. It was Blair, as you say, that decided to open up to the rest of the world, and then the EU expanded. So no, Nathan, I agree with you. It was willful dishonesty. Now, you've got some very, very important elections taking place in your country next Tuesday, and it would seem that immigration is at the centre of that debate too.
It is. Seems to be almost coordinated behind the scenes or something, because immigration is really the biggest, hottest issue, fueling all the things that are in concern to all of us as kind of European or European-based people. So we've got the caravan issue in America, and obviously in Central Europe with Hungary and that they have this people holding out like not Juncker, but. The Hungarian. I forgot their names.
Yeah. You've got Viktor Orban, of course, and he's refusing to take migrants that are part of EU quotas. It's a hell of a row. Nathan, just quickly, do you think when it comes to immigration in America today, you get a fair debate on this in the mainstream media?
I don't think it's a fair debate. I think they're trying to quash any dissent whatsoever, and the mainstreams of dissent are coming through social media, and they're suspending any kind of accounts that are,
Okay. Yeah. No, having fair debate on emotive subjects is never easy. Nathan, great, and thank you for the call. I'm off to William, a new caller from Muswell Hill. William, were they being willfully dishonest, or was it just a bit of false optimism?
Willfully dishonest. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Why did they, how did they think, William, that they could keep saying it at election after election, and we were going to believe it?
Absolutely. But may I start off by asking you a question?
Go on.
What's your understanding of the status of European immigrants to the UK today?
Well, Mrs May's rather clouded this. I said the week after the referendum we should say that anyone that has come legally to the United Kingdom absolutely should be told. Of course, they've got every right to stay. They've come here legally. We are not a banana republic. Now, what we're hearing today is that employers must check EU workers' status if there is a no-deal Brexit. But hey, checking someone's status isn't, in the event of a no-deal, that's hardly a disaster, is it?
Correct. No, my girlfriend is a lot younger than I am. She was with a friend of hers today. They're both from Lithuania originally. They've both been here 15 to 20 years, and her friend is petrified at the moment. She's got two young children struggling.
Well,
I may lose her job even.
William
believes that
Mrs May has used this as part of the negotiation. The one big offer that I wanted us to make in the beginning was to say everyone that's come legally has come legally and is absolutely welcome to stay. And I hope people like her do not have to worry for too much longer. William, I thank you for your call. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's now 6:30 and, George Osborne, to me, lets the cat out of the bag by admitting that the target the Tories kept putting up at election after election of saying net migration would come down to tens of thousands was never achievable. So I'm asking you whether that's willful dishonesty or was it just false optimism on their behalf. I think you know where I stand on that one, but I'm pleased he's come clean, he's telling the truth, and he says, effectively, that was the lethal weapon that the Leave campaign had during the Brexit referendum. And on Brexit, Dominic Raab has written a letter to Hilary Benn, who is the chair of the Commons Brexit Committee, and in it he said, I will be happy to give evidence to the committee when a deal is finished and currently expect November the 21st to be suitable. So the Brexit Secretary indicating that he thinks a deal is nearly done, and certainly indications that I've had from Brussels, everything over there is very, very relaxed indeed. They not only think that a deal is about to be done, but it's one that's going to suit them very nicely indeed. All's going to be revealed over the course of the next few weeks. And here's one to ponder, one perhaps to think about. Labour MP Kate Osamore She's the Shadow International Development Secretary, and she employs her son, and he works for her as a researcher, paid between £30,000 and £35,000 a year. Nothing, you might say, unusual about that. However, he has just been convicted not only of possessing Class A drugs, but with the intent to supply, which is pretty serious. As a result of that, he has resigned as a Labour councillor, but it appears he is going to go on working for his mother in Parliament. Sir Alistair Graham, a former chairman of the Committee on Standards in Public Life, said that she should sack her son. He is clearly not the kind of person who should be working in Parliament, but at the moment he still is. When he was stopped by the police, he was found with cocaine, ecstasy, ketamine and cannabis. And I repeat the point that it wasn't just the possession of Class A drugs, it was, under this conviction, the intent to supply. Do you think that people like that should continue to work in the House of Commons and should continue to work for their mother? And I wonder, if it was the Conservative Party, I suspect there'd be even a bigger hue and cry than there seems to be at the moment. That's an issue I think we will debate at some point another time, but it's just something for you all to think about. I would have thought probably better for everybody if he stood down and paid a bit of penance. But we'll see what happens. Back to George Osborne. Let's just remind ourselves of what Osborne said.
On immigration, we were promising targets that we couldn't deliver.
Promising targets that we couldn't deliver. Over and over and over and over. And we are the mug punters. We're the voters. We keep voting for it every time. I wonder whether Jason in Acton was taken in by all of this. Hi, Jason.
Hi, how are you, Nigel? You okay?
Fine. So should they have set these targets, Jason, or should they have, having done it once and failed, readjusted?
Okay, question. Every country is run like a company. That's why you like Donald Trump, right? He said it out of his own mouth. Now, every company has a forecast.
Yes.
And if they have a forecast and they don't achieve it, does that mean they deceived you? Deceive is a very, very powerful word. Deceiving is very evil, very manipulative.
Well, now, Jason, if you are okay, if you're a company and you're particularly a public company with shareholders,
yes,
and you have an annual AGM, and you keep making a forecast that is wrong by a massive factor, do you know what happens? You just don't stay in your job. You got rid of. You got rid of.
Yes, I agree. But fair is fair.
Absolutely.
End of the day. Deceiving is a very powerful word to be putting out.
Okay, all right. I accept that willful deception is a very strong term. I accept that, Jason. But don't you think when you listen to George Osborne's words, he's virtually admitting that?
I feel that he said what he said. If you repeat it again, he goes, we made a promise and we didn't achieve it.
I tell you what, Jason, let's just stay on the line. Let's just listen to him again. Exactly.
Okay.
On immigration, we were promising targets that we couldn't deliver.
So we were promising targets that we couldn't deliver. Now, if they couldn't deliver it, isn't that because they knew that actually they'd lost control of the borders?
Now, the thing is...
Am I being unfair? I don't know. I mean, tell me.
Okay. He said we couldn't. We made a promise and they couldn't deliver.
That we knew we couldn't deliver.
He said he knew we couldn't deliver.
Yeah. Let's listen again.
On immigration, we were promising targets that we couldn't deliver.
That we couldn't deliver.
We couldn't deliver.
We couldn't deliver. So you could do it once, all right? You could do it once in the 2010 election, and I accept that, and you don't deliver, and you understand the reasons that you can't deliver. Why would you go on making the same promise?
We mean with Theresa May?
Well, in fact, with the 2015 general election with Cameron, and then again in 2017 with Theresa May. I mean, look, you could, if you're being charitable, you could say it was false optimism. But Jason, I can't help thinking they were just saying this because they thought it's what people wanted to hear.
Okay, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
When it comes down to, I know, because I very much remember the boss that asked about the NHS, the money.
Yeah.
Would you not say that is something that wasn't delivered, and would I dare say that's deceitful?
Well, it was delivered this week in the budget. It was delivered this week in the budget.
350 million.
Yeah, it was. Absolutely. In fact, more than that was. Now, whether it's costed or not is a separate debate. But he can. Boris Johnson now can say, and look, I didn't agree with it at the time. I thought it was too. I thought they should use the lower figure. But Boris Johnson can now say that has been delivered. Osborne can't. Jason, do you think? Let me just ask you this.
Okay.
Osborne has said these things, and he's talked about why they lost the referendum and what they got wrong. He was at least being honest about their mistakes, wasn't he?
Yeah, I feel he's being honest. Don't get me wrong. I'm not against the Brexit. I'm not against anybody Brexit or people that want to stay. All I'm saying, fair is fair. Yes, he said something that is truthful.
Yep.
But the way you are painting it is almost like they sat there and they said, okay, guys, we're going to go siege everybody and we're just going to give them what they want.
Yeah.
Me, I don't think, I just think of it, they had a target. They believed in that target, but they didn't hit it.
Well, Jason, you are more generous to them than I am. But thank you very much indeed for the call. Ross says on Facebook, you've got a cheek accusing anyone of willful dishonesty. Look at the mess this country's in due to your Brexit. Oh, Ross, please. I mean, for goodness sake. And I'll say this to you, Ross, as I've said again and again and again. Please tell me what I said in the referendum that wasn't true. Open offer to anyone, whenever, 0345 6060 973. Paul says in 2022, the Tories will pay for their betrayal. Well, I don't trust the Tories anymore, so I'm voting for Corbyn next time. Well, don't worry, with Corbyn, you will not be let down on immigration targets. Do you know why? Because there won't be any at all. Sam is calling from Archway. Hi, Sam.
Hello, Nigel. How are you?
I am well, and I am pleased that Osborne has said what he said.
Well, I agree with that in a certain sense, but I think it's quite rich of you, Nigel, to be talking about these false promises that George Osborne made, despite the fact that I know that you were from a different Leave campaign, but you obviously knew, because you're not thick, you're intelligent,
kind of you,
and you know that these are unattainable goals. I mean, out of the EU, the international immigration outside of the EU exceeds that of the EU.
Because of our because of our government failure. Because Theresa May as Home Secretary was hopeless.
It's not government failure. This is law, and you know this, and you're playing along.
No,
Sam.
Sam, since 2010, since 2010, we've had control. We've had control since 2010 of non-EU migration. That was up to us. There was a promise made we were going to reduce it, and the government failed. It failed on both counts.
A promise isn't legality. It's not changing laws. You know this. This is what annoys me, Nigel.
But why?
I listen to you every single day.
Sam, you can you can stand at an election and say this is what we're going to do, right? And you can do it out of false optimism. Right? You can think, this is what we are, rather like the Italians with their budget. The Italians' budget works if they grow at 1.5%. We'll see whether that works out. But when you've done it once, and you know it hasn't worked, and you understand the reasons it hasn't worked, why do you go on doing it again and again?
Nigel, what is the reason that it hasn't worked? Tell me. Give me facts. Give me facts, despite the fact
that GDP... Number one, we had no control. Number one, we had no control whatsoever over the numbers from the EU, and number two, we were incompetent with the rest of the world. They're two pretty good reasons, aren't they?
Listen to me. You are peddling nonsense. I know that we are not part of the Schengen Agreement. And the Schengen Agreement is the cross-border agreement that means that someone, for example, from France can go into Spain or Germany. Yeah. We are not part of that. It's not true.
Sam, it is unlimited. The numbers of people from the European Union coming to get jobs in this country is unlimited, and that is beyond debate. Not being in Schengen means they have to show a passport. That's all. Thank you. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC at 6:45. The Conservative Party were terrified of losing votes to UKIP on the question of immigration, so this is what they did. Here was Cameron in 2010.
To get net migration into the tens of thousands.
And here was Theresa May.
We need to bring net migration down to sustainable levels. The government believes that that is tens of thousands.
And George Osborne yesterday said,
on immigration, we were promising targets that we couldn't deliver.
You see, it was all purely political. They were doing it because they wanted you to vote for them. They knew they could not deliver this. They knew that non-EU migration was out of control, or that May had failed completely as Home Secretary to deal with any of it, and they knew with the European Union we simply had no control and no idea what the numbers were going to be. I say well done, George Osborne, for being honest. Fiona says, I listened to Osborne last night and wished he was still in power. Good to hear a sane, intelligent voice. So Fiona, clearly a big George Osborne fan. Migration is only good when migrants can support themselves completely and pay for school places, etc. Otherwise, it's unfair to people who paid their taxes for years. Well, that is one of the big, powerful arguments that is out there, and you know, there'll be people come on a show like this and say, actually, you know, they all pay tax, they pay for themselves. Others will say, because numbers are going up, we have to build roads. Either way, this has been a huge issue in British politics over the last few years, and I think Osborne basically admitted two things last night. One, they kept making promises that absolutely weren't going to be delivered, but it was done for electoral reasons, and two, that in the end, and as he said, in the referendum, that question became lethal for them because people linked migration, open doors and European Union membership. And he did very much play down the question of sovereignty, which upsets Matthew on Twitter, who says, if Osborne thinks migration was the number one issue and not the continual bleeding away of our sovereignty to unelected bureaucrats, he's delusional. Matthew, I do think that bleeding away of our sovereignty to the Junkers of this world, of course, was a huge part of the referendum. But I don't think the Leave side could have won just on the sovereignty argument. I think it was actually the immigration argument that meant the turnout went up to an historically high 73%. I think it was that really got Leave over the line. George Osborne clearly believes the same. Going to go to a different George. This George lives in Hackney. Good evening, George.
Good evening. Nice to hear from you and nice to speak to you.
I'm very pleased to have you on. So, you know, I mean, he was at least telling the truth yesterday, wasn't he?
Yes, he was telling the truth, but the joke is on the general public that actually didn't go home and research what he was saying. I mean, he was talking about bringing figures down. You can't do that. Our economy is based on cheap labour. Foreign labour mainly. I mean, for example, the statistics for London, 95% of the lowest paid jobs are ethnic minority groups.
Yeah.
They're the people doing the work. You can come to my house right now, and at 5 a.m, when I wake up to go to my ambulance in London, you can look at that bus, and virtually everybody on that bus will be an ethnic minority, and everybody will have shady papers.
And is this, George, because...
And I'm not against that.
Is this because, George, this is what the big employers want? And politicians have done what the big money's asked them to do?
Correct. They have done that. I mean, do you think that the banks, when they're getting their cleaning contract done and they're renewing it, they must think to themselves, oh, how is this contract going to be like, you know, £40,000-50,000 less than the other one? How are they going to staff this? It's through cheap labour. The thing you have to remember about every person that comes, or immigrant, we haven't paid for their education. We haven't paid for their healthcare, the midwifery. We haven't paid for a single thing. So when they come over here, they're a net gain to our economy, every single one of them.
No, George.
Because they come when they're 20.
No, George, because...
All right, tell me why.
Well, the problem is, and what never gets costed into this, and there's a slightly separate debate, I won't spend long on it, but the problem is this. When your population increases by 6.5 million over the course of the last 16 years, with 82% of it being directly down to immigration, what nobody costs is what the new roads cost, the new hospitals cost, the new schools cost. There are massive capital costs to a population booming like that. But hey, let's get back to George Osborne. Do you think George was right when he said it was this debate that proved to be lethal to his side in the referendum?
Yes, absolutely, yes.
Whether right or wrong, but yeah, this is what people voted on. I believe it was. George, I'm going to run on. I've got loads of callers. I'm off to Chichester to speak to Michael. Good evening, Michael.
Good evening, Nigel.
So were they being willfully deceptive, or was it just a sort of case of false optimism over and over?
I just don't think... I think that when Osborne's going, speaking out now, what he's talking about is he's finally criticising his boss. And Cameron wasn't so much being deceitful as being dumb. He never really understood how the European Union worked. He was...
You're saying our Prime Minister, for all those years, didn't understand it? No, really, Michael, honestly.
I honestly, you can see how he went off to do his renegotiation. He always thought he could get something out of the bag just from talking to the Germans. You could see this because I think you've been inside the European Union structure for so long. Do you really think that Cameron knew about European Union, the way he could have to do some negotiation?
I'm not sure.
He could tweak the rules.
I'm not sure the current mob know much about it either. But yeah, I mean, it was actually quite pathetic to watch him going off, looking to get some emergency break on immigration. Mrs. Merkel saying 9. I mean, it was really quite pitiful, wasn't it?
Well, it linked in. I think, as you keep saying, it's two connected things. People could debate about, was it sovereignty or was it immigration? They were tied. Yeah. People could see that we had no powers over our borders. Therefore, they knew that our sovereignty did not sit with our parliament.
Actually, the immigration debate was a subset, really, wasn't it, of the sovereignty debate? Yeah. Michael, I'm going to run to Northwood and speak to Stephen, a new caller to this show. Good evening, Stephen.
Good evening. Nigel, there's two phrases you've mentioned last few minutes persistently: willful deceit and this false optimism over and over. And I would accuse you of that, because
I've always been wildly optimistic, Stephen, absolutely.
No, because with willful deceit, you said a couple of times when you said what Osborne said, that he said knowingly couldn't deliver. You said that a couple of times, and then when you played the recording, he didn't say knowingly. He just said couldn't deliver.
I think that's okay. I think that's the
knowingly. I think he did it deliberately. When he said couldn't deliver, that could be interpreted as not able to deliver. Tried to deliver, but wasn't able.
And Stephen, that's the debate. I am interpreting, and you're on the line. Let's listen to him again.
On immigration, we were promising targets that we couldn't deliver.
Right, we were promising targets we couldn't deliver. That says to me that he knew they couldn't be delivered. My interpretation, Stephen, is that he knew it, and it was willful deception. If you want to give the other argument, please. The line's yours.
Okay, so my interpretation of it is we had targets which we couldn't deliver. We tried to deliver, but we weren't able to. So that's not willful deceit. That's trying and not succeeding. That's not the same as deliberately misleading.
All right. So we do that in 2010, 2015 and 2017. Stephen, all right, you're more generous to them than I am. I've got time for one last caller. I'm off to Nick in Vancouver, who we've spoken to before. Hi, Nick.
Oh, hi, Nigel.
Hi there.
Obviously, the British government could reduce immigration to 0 tomorrow if it wanted to. It could just say, no one gets to come in. The reason they couldn't deliver those targets is because it would have been catastrophic to the British economy. And that's the reason why we will continue to usher immigrants into Britain, is because we bloody need them.
Thank you.
We will grind to a halt without them.
Well, Osborne actually did say, didn't he? We played it earlier. He did say, not only was it unachievable in the past, and as I say, my interpretation is they knew it wasn't. He says in the future it will continue at big numbers. Nick, if the argument is we need large-scale net migration running at 1/3 of a million people a year, and without it the economy will grind to a halt. That's a debate. If the government was honest with people about that, that'd be fine. But what they did again and again and again was to promise they'd deliver tens of thousands, knowing it wasn't going to happen.
Well, it's the same argument that you could apply to Brexit. If you'd been honest with the people, you'd have told them, look, in order for the British economy to continue to carry on at this pace, we will also need to bring in, tens and thousands of immigrants. The colour will change. They won't come from Poland. They won't be Catholic and white. They will come from Bangladesh and Nigeria, and they will be Muslim and brown. I don't think you could have sold that argument to the British people, could you, Nigel?
Nick, I tell you what, I don't care who comes into Britain, as long as they fit in, pay their taxes, contribute to society, and we shouldn't discriminate in favour of people from one part of the world against another. A strong debate. I'll be back tomorrow evening at 6. At 10 tonight, it's Tom Swarbrick. But up next, it's Ian Dale.
Nigel, thank you very much.